no mollycoddling. And what mollycoddling means is it's like protecting somebody, wrapping them in cotton wool. But actually, at the time, I think my mum realised that if she'd provided us with too much protection, then in later life we may not have had the confidence and the self-esteem that would allow us to succeed. I know that personally, if I hadn't had that early freedom to fall, then I'm pretty sure that I would not later have learned to fly. Find yourself a college or a university where the staff are supportive, and then use that support to the utmost and get through it. Then that'll set you in incredibly good stead for a career where your lack of sight becomes less and less important.
So how's it going?
It's going well. I think we're about 2/3 of the way across from Astoria to New Hampshire. Did 60 miles this morning. Yeah, it's going well.
Before we get started, Chris, 3,600 miles. Can you just tell me what bug drove you to cross America?
Good question. So I'm 60 years old this year. So I did a end-to-end ride across the UK 5 years ago now, which is about 1,000 miles from Land's End to John O'Groats. And I was thinking, well, when I'm 60, what can I do as a sort of another sort of fundraising cycle ride? And I thought, well, if I did 60 miles a day for 60 days at the age of 60, then that's got a certain ring to it, 60 by 60 at 60. So that's 3,600 miles. So I started looking for a route that was 3,600 miles long. And I found this route from all the way across the states, from Oregon to New Hampshire.
Welcome to Blind Abilities. I'm Jeff Thompson. Today I'm talking to Chris Mairs. He's a blind tandem bicycle rider headed across the United States. He's from England and set course 3,600 miles across the United States, going west to east on an event he calls 6060, a celebration for his birthday, but the initiative is much bigger and meaningful than that. And Chris will be able to tell you about a line of sight. How you doing, Chris?
Hey, Jeff. Good to talk to you. Yes, indeed. I am doing surprisingly well for someone who's spent the last 4.5 weeks sitting on the back of a tandem. I think we've done about 2,500 miles. We're averaging 80 miles a day. And the purpose of the ride is to raise money for cataract surgery in the developing world. So I'm actually blind myself. I have a version of retinitis pigmentosa that is not curable. What I discovered earlier this year is that the most common cause of blindness in the world is cataracts, and amazingly you can restore sight to someone who has cataracts in the developing world for the princely sum of $40. So with $40 we can actually transform someone's life. So I figured that if I could raise $40 for each mile that I ride across America, then that's about 3,600 miles, and we could restore sight to 3,600 people, which feels to me like a pretty worthwhile sort of target.
Yeah. What a great cause, Chris. Being able to transform 3,600 people's lives for $40 a piece. That's awesome. And what a selfless way to celebrate your birthday, 60 by 60, Chris.
So yeah, I'm 60 this year, so 60 miles a day for 60 days. That was my target. So that's 3,600. In fact, we're probably going to do more like 80 miles a day because we're doing it on a supported ride. So everything is running to a very tight schedule. So we do it in 50 days with a 3 or 4 rest days in the middle. So we average about 80 miles per day when we're actually riding. I think our longest day was 119, and today was quite a short one. We did 60 miles today, and we were in the hotel by lunchtime, which is very nice.
Yeah, I was reading one of your posts. I think it was from La Crosse to Fond du Lac in Wisconsin, the 119 miles.
I lose track. We've done
cheese curds.
Cheese curds, yes. We've powered by cheese curds, yes. We've ridden several days that have been over 100 miles, and it's all a bit of a blur at this stage.
Chris, I got this from one of your blogs. Can you explain speed dating on a tandem?
Oh, yeah. So when I decided to do this ride, one of the big challenges, apart from just getting fit enough to do it myself, was actually finding somebody else who could give up 7 weeks out of their life to actually do this slightly crazy enterprise. Fortunately, I have a friend who's also completely blind who introduced me to one of his friends and said, James might be interested in doing this with you. So I just emailed James and he said he'd love to do it. He couldn't do the whole thing, but he had a roommate who could possibly do the other half. So introduced me to Alistair, who I'd never met before. Alistair's never ridden a tandem before. So we had a conversation. Seems like a reasonable sort of guy. Came down to where I live in England and we had a practice ride. Didn't kill me. So that was good. He's a really strong rider. James is a really strong rider as well. So they're basically, Alistair did the first half until Sioux Falls. And then when we got to Sioux Falls, I got fresh horses in the form of James taking over on the front of the tandem.
Chris, now you're in the back, but there's a name for each position, the front person and the back person.
Yes. So the guy on the front is typically called the captain or the pilot. And the guy on the back, which is, of course, me, is the stoker.
Chris, I've been listening to your blog, and, you're riding with these people for over 100 miles a day sometimes, and the chit-chat, the camaraderie that goes on. That must be really interesting conversations.
Yeah, so there's a group of about 40 of us doing the ride. And, as you say, you build a certain amount of camaraderie over going through the tough times, and you start talking over breakfast with these people who 3 weeks ago were complete strangers, and you're talking about things that you really would not expect to talk to strangers about, usually to do with discomfort from sitting on a saddle for several weeks.
I can just imagine. Knowing the geography of the United States pretty good. What was it like coming across? You started out west there, headed east over the mountains. What was that like coming through the Rockies?
Started in Oregon, and then we crossed over the Teton Pass and I'm not sure I can pronounce this, the Togawati Pass. I think they were in Idaho, but apologies if I've got that wrong. They might have just been into Wyoming by then. Anyway, that was the Continental Divide, where we got up to about 9,600 feet, I think, which is way, way, way higher than I've ever cycled, because the highest mountains in the UK are only 4,000 feet. So, this is completely new territory for me.
Like they say, everything's bigger in America.
Everything's bigger and better, of course.
So being at such high altitudes for the first time, did you notice any difference?
Just at that point, you're just starting to get to at 9,500, you're just starting to get to the point where the oxygen is getting a bit thinner. So I don't know, to be honest, whether it was the oxygen being thinner or just the amount of climbing we'd had to do, but sure enough, I was pretty exhausted by the time we got to the top.
Chris, you mentioned that you had RP from such an early age, and by 18 you weren't riding bikes anymore. But what led you back into bicycling?
Well, when I was younger, my passion was water skiing and alpine skiing. When I was in my early 50s, I had both my hips replaced, so I was looking for something where I could actually still get some exercise and get a reasonable amount of exhilaration, which you get on the back of a tandem when you're racing down a hill at about 40 miles an hour. So that's exciting enough for me. So something that would give me exercise and the wind in my hair and all that sort of thing. And tandem cycling seemed like a good alternative.
Chris, what's it like for you traveling across America from Oregon all the way to where you are now, at least? You're going through hills, mountains, flatlands, and without sight. What's that like for you on the back of a tandem?
Well, it's interesting, actually, because and I covered this in one of my blog posts. We had a day where we went up to Mount Rushmore, and everybody else in the group was going, this is an amazing day's ride. They really loved it. And I'm thinking, this is one of the worst days on the whole ride. It's like the hills are too steep, the descents are so steep that you can't enjoy them, the roads are too busy, the shoulder's terrible, it's too hot. I think this is a miserable day. And the reason really why everybody else thought it was great, and I thought it was just hard work, was that they were enjoying all the visual sensations on that particular day. We'd gone to this iconic Mount Rushmore, and we'd gone through the Black Hills, so apparently some pretty amazing scenery. And that was what was sort of motivating them. But for me, it was just another day's riding. So ironically, the days that I find the most interesting are the ones where we're just going through the sort of flat bits of Idaho or Wyoming or whatever, where the road is got a good surface. Maybe you've got a tailwind and you're just moving along very nicely at 20 miles an hour. That's fine. So I think the lack of visual stimulus is probably the only thing that's a significant challenge. If you've got a good captain on the front of the bike, then to some extent it's easier. I mean, all I have to do is just pedal. The poor guy on the front's got to navigate and all the other stuff as well. So it's fine.
Oh, yeah, the Black Hills. I was out there for Ski for Light. There's one hill that was 7,200 feet up. A lot of up and downs.
Oh, yes.
Chris, when did you realize that vision loss was something that you would have to accept?
So actually, my condition is a hereditary condition, and my elder sister was diagnosed with the same problem. So by the time I was 2 years old, they'd already diagnosed that I had a form of retinitis pigmentosa, and I could still ride a bike when I was a young kid, but by the time I was 18, it wasn't safe to be riding a bike. I couldn't really read anymore. So over a period of many, many years, I've gradually adopted and adapted to different techniques. And I only started riding a tandem about 6 years ago now. So I had a long period when I didn't do any cycling at all. But now I'm quite addicted to the tandem riding.
Chris, I always enjoyed reading your blogs, and one of them was you talking about your mom telling you no MollyCuddle. Can you explain to our listeners what she meant by no MollyCuddle?
Yeah, so this was my mother brought up a family with 5 children, all of whom had sight loss. And we all turned out to have pretty successful lives one way or another. We all got very good academic results, had successful careers, built long-term marriages and so on. And just before my mother died, I was asking her what she was most proud about in her life. And after a little bit of thought, she said, bringing up a family of 5 partially sighted children so successfully. And I said, well, to what do you attribute that? And she paused for a bit and then said, no mollycoddling. And what mollycoddling means is it's like protecting somebody, wrapping them in cotton wool. And her approach to bringing us all up, and I think it might have been the necessity of trying to look after 5 children on her own, but her basic approach was to let us get on with it. So, when I was 6 years old, I walked to school on my own. When I was 8 years old, I went shopping with my 4-year-old brother. When I was 10 years old, I was like chopping wood. When I was 12-year-old, I was wielding a small armory of power tools. And, today, people would probably raise their eyebrows a bit and think, I'm not sure that's terribly health and safety conscious. But actually, at the time, I think my mum realised that if she'd provided us with too much protection, then in later life we may not have had the confidence and the self-esteem that would allow us to succeed. And I know that personally, if I hadn't had that early freedom to fall, then I'm pretty sure that I would not later have learned to fly, metaphorically speaking.
Learn to fly. I like that. It's really something that you had a strong advocate in your mother at such an early age.
Yes. Yeah. At the time, it didn't always feel that helpful, but, in hindsight, it's very much made me who I am.
Right. It seems like you're really determined because, 1,000 miles in England, then to take on at age 60, to come across the United States and do your 60 miles, 60 days in a row across the United States, 3,600 miles plus, that shows determination and pretty much relates to what we call self-determination here. And students in the transition age group, going from high school to college to the workplace, that's something that they really have to develop. Could you tell us a little bit about your college and your career?
I have a degree in computer science from Cambridge, so that very much took me naturally into the technology space. I was a programmer for a few years and then moved on and co-founded a technology business which still now employs about 700 people. I'm not really involved in that anymore. Most of my time now is spent working with young entrepreneurs in high technology businesses, providing them with advice, mentoring, and doing a bit of angel investing.
That's very impressive. Very impressive.
It keeps me out of trouble.
Yeah, keeps you on the bike.
Yeah.
Chris, being a Cambridge graduate and successful in your career, what advice would you have for someone who is transitioning from high school to college to the workplace?
I think realistic self-belief is pretty important. It's very easy sometimes to just go, oh, this is all a bit difficult. I can't cope, or I'm not going to do that. Actually, if you do just force yourself through, then certainly for me, that's proved to be immensely valuable. And again, for me, my lecturers and everybody at university was incredibly supportive. So find yourself a college or a university where the staff are supportive, and then use that support to the utmost and get through it. Then that'll set you in incredibly good stead for a career where your lack of sight becomes less and less important. The more qualifications and expertise you have, the less important it is that you can't actually see.
That's well put.
Thank you.
Here's a question for you. What kind of alternative devices do you use for everyday life?
Well, I use an iPhone with VoiceOver, which is absolutely brilliant. You know, it's one of the great ways that I interact with social media and with the internet and so on. I do use a laptop with JAWS. I'm thinking of moving over to a Mac. So I think, you know, with the combination of JAWS or a Mac and a smartphone, it's pretty okay to access a lot of information on the internet. I get very frustrated when websites try and do something fancy for sighted people, which then makes it impossible for blind people to actually access something that was previously quite straightforward. Exactly. But, you know, yeah. I'm sure that you've got plenty of other people who you talk to who have exactly the same problems.
Just curious, Chris, is there any devices that you have along with you that are exclusively because of your blindness, something that you've adapted, or some alternative device that you use?
No, I don't think there are actually. We've got a Garmin on the bike, but I can't. That's not accessible to me. So I just use a couple of apps on my iPhone if I want to do things like tracking my heart rate. Then any app on the not any, but there are many accessible apps on the iPhone where with a heart rate monitor you can find out what you need to find out. I'm waiting for the day when we have a piece of technology that will actually allow me to ride a bike without having a captain on the front, so when I can go back to riding a solo bike. But I think that's going to be a few years away yet.
Well, Chris, Ira, the virtual interpreter for the blind, is, you know, you might need two of them, one for the rear view, too. So, Chris, what is the target date? Where's the finish line?
August the 7th.
And you're right on schedule.
And we're counting down the days. Yep.
Chris, can you tell our listeners where they can follow your blog on the web?
So the website is called alineofsight.org.uk. So that's http://alineofsight.org.uk.
And they can subscribe to your newsletter.
They can indeed. I am blogging as we speak, actually. I'd just written my first draft of today's blog. When we finish speaking, I just got to do a bit of Wikipedia and Google research, and then it'll be done for the day.
And Chris, what part of England are you from?
So I live in Bath, which is to the west of England, and both my co-riders, and they're actually studying their PhDs in Edinburgh University.
And what kind of tandem bike are you riding?
We are using a Co-Motion Speedster, which interestingly was built in Oregon. I had her shipped over to the UK to do the Land's End to John O'Groats ride, and so then she came back home, back to Oregon to start this ride.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for coming on to Blind Abilities, taking your time out of your busy schedule, 60 miles, 60 days across the United States. And, and sharing your initiative, alignofsight.org.uk. And it's such a great initiative that you're doing, $40 to help someone change their life. And if you're listening, go check out alignofsight.org.uk and help transform a life, help make a difference. And thank you so much, Chris.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Jeff. Thank you very much.
It was great talking to Chris Mairs, and a great big thanks to Chi Chow for providing us with some beautiful music. Thank you, Chi Chow, and that's LCHEECHAU on Twitter. Thank you, Chi Chow. This has been a Blind Abilities production. We thank you for listening, and until next time, bye-bye.
When we share
what we see through
each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap
between the limited expectations and the realities of blind abilities.
The realities of blind
abilities.
For more podcasts with a blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com, on Twitter at blindabilities. Download our app from the App Store, Blindabilities, that's 2 words, or send us an email at info@blindabilities.com. Thanks for listening.